Soldiers were wounded by a roadside bomb planted near the border. It's the third such incident along Israel's northern frontier this month. In retaliation, Israeli jets struck several military targets in Syria overnight.
This night, Israeli defense forces attacked targets in Syrian territory. Those targets were Syrian elements that not only allowed but also collaborated in attacks on our forces. Our policy is very clear. We hurt those who hurt us. And we also thwart, as much as we can, transfer of arms at sea, air and land.
Syria's armed forces said one soldier was killed and 7 others wounded in the Israeli airstrikes. By acknowledging the raid, in contrast to official silence over previous strikes, Israel appeared intent on delivering a message of deterrence to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Well, joining us now from Tel Aviv University, Israeli political scientist Emmanuel Navon. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. Israel's blaming Syria, not Hezbollah. Which makes more sense to you?
Well, both are related. In other words, Hezbollah is an organization that has the active support of Syria, at least of the Syrian leader Bashar Assad, but also of Iran. So one cannot completely distinguish between Syria and Hezbollah. The Syrian regime and Hezbollah are closely related.
Closely related. Nonetheless, who's got more of an interest at this particular point? I guess the question is, why now?
Well, I think that, first of all, it might be that Hezbollah is trying to avenge the destruction of some of its infrastructure and the killing of one of its leaders by Israel recently. It might also be that Hezbollah, which is also very much influenced, if not controlled by Iran, is trying to provoke Israel in a conflict. And again, another theory is that Bashar Assad himself, who is still involved in his civil war, where he has killed almost 150,000 of his own citizens, is trying to divert the attention of his own population towards Israel. This is an old Arab trick, trying to divert the frustration of the people by using Israel.
And it also comes, and I got to ask you about this, just after the taking of the strategic town of Yabrud near the Lebanese border. How does that fit into this puzzle?
Well, I think that, again, today the puzzle is that we have three major actors, Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran vis-a-vis Israel. And I think that today it's pretty clear that Iran might be interested in provoking Israel together with Bashar Assad. Don't forget also that Iran is today negotiating with the major Western powers about its nuclear program, and might also try to divert attention towards Israel.
But hang on, if they're negotiating with the West, this isn't the time to exacerbate relations with Israel.
Well, the calculations of the Iranian regime are not always completely clear. I think that today we might have an intentional policy from Iran to escalate, especially in light of the policy of the Russian leader Putin in the Ukraine. It might be that the Iranian leaders are trying to test the resolution of the determination of the United States in light of what is perceived by Iran and by many Middle East actors as U.S. Lack of leadership and weakness vis-a-vis Russia.
All right, I'm not sure I understand how Russia would how it would fit in terms of this. But let me just ask you more broadly: if Assad manages to break the rebellion, what would be the consequences for Israel?
Well, as far as Israel is concerned, Syria is not the only failed state surrounding us. Unfortunately, in the past 3 years, not only Syria, but many other Middle Eastern countries have been falling apart and torn by civil wars. Syria, unfortunately, will continue to be a failed state. The only difference is that if Assad remains in power, that would mean that his alliance with Iran and with Hezbollah would probably be reinforced. And this alliance also has the indirect support of Russia today. Russia, which provides the technology, the nuclear technology to Iran. So if Assad would be able to crush the opposition in Syria, Syria would remain a failed state that would not threaten Israel directly, but that would maintain the alliance with Iran and with Hezbollah.
When you see reports of the plight of those besieged Palestinians inside Damascus's Yarmouk camp, where according to Amnesty International, at least 128 people have died of starvation, do you feel for the Palestinians? Do you say to yourself that Israel's interests are perhaps closer than it may seem to those of the Palestinians?
Well, Israel, as you know, recently provided medical care to many of the Syrian rebels who crossed the border in the Golan Heights. And Israel, of course, feels terrible for all these victims wherever they are in the region. But I think also that this distinction between Palestinians and Syrians is completely artificial. Historically, the British mandate, before the British mandate during the Ottoman Empire, this region was part of Syria. So there's no historical distinction and ethnical distinction between Palestinians and Syrians. But they're all victims of the Assad, of the madness of Assad. And I think that Israel can pride itself as having provided and continuing to provide medical care and assistance to the victims of the Assad regime.
But do you see the Palestinians, do you see Israel drawing closer to the Palestinians as the conflict in Syria gets prolonged?
Well, as you know, negotiations are still going on between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. We're getting closer to the deadline set by the American administration. Unfortunately, it is hard to see a positive outcome to those negotiations, especially in light of the fact that the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, declared about 2 weeks ago that he will not give up on what he calls the right of return of the descendants of the 1948 refugees to Israel itself, which he knows is completely absurd and will never happen, and yet he still insists on it. So I think that as long as Abbas insists on invading Israel with 5 million immigrants from the Middle East, he knows that Israel will never sign its own demographic suicide. So I think as long as Abbas does not make any concessions, it is hard to see how a deal can be reached, the same way that he rejected the 2008 offer from Israel from the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert.
All right. So many fences still to be mended on several fronts. Many thanks, Emmanuel Navon, for joining us there from the University of Tel Aviv. Stay with us. Much more to come here on France 24. We'll give you the latest news, including the situation, of course, in Crimea, followed by the day's business and sports. You're watching France 24.
Special event.
On the 23rd and 30th of March, France goes to the polls to elect its mayors. But for many, this is a vote on the performance of President François Hollande and his socialist government. What message will the voters send? France 24 brings you 2 special election evenings. From 8 p.m. Paris time, our political experts will discuss the results as they come in. You can post your reactions and comments on the results live on France24.com. For an in-depth view of the French local elections on France 24 and on France24.com.